Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Security Repo Podcast. As always, I'm Dwayne, your host, and of course, we have Kazar.
Hello.
This week, we have a really awesome guest, David Hawthorne. He's a technology factotum with 20 years of experience across systems administration, data and software architecture, and DevOps. He's the director of cloud engineering at O3 Solutions and successfully led a SOC 2 and GRC initiatives there. He's dedicated to delivering business value through automation and analytics and actively contributes to the DevSecOps and data communities as a speaker and mentor. Welcome to the Security Repo Podcast, David.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Right. So let's start off with something that I appreciate speaking about to all my fellow engineers, which is compliance and security. Not always, but I often get challenged, and I have my colleagues just constantly asking me, like, does this specific compliance requirement actually help security? And, I'm quite torn because often I have a very hard time actually justifying to my own coworkers that this compliance requirement actually helps security. So I'd like to speak with you about this, David. Do you think, in your opinion, that compliance is the same thing as security? Is it different? Does it help security? What are your thoughts on that?
So for me, compliance is the reporting of the controls. The controls are the security, the actions that we take to secure our environments, those controls. Whereas compliance is the accountability and reporting side of security. And thinking about like DevSecOps, right? Having that compliance layer enables us to give immediate feedback to the developers. And that's compliance, right? You get a report, your code's secure. Whereas on the security side, it might be putting that report into action so that it gets delivered. And it'd be the checks on those controls, right? So if they're building a new resource, they get alerted if it's not compliant. Ideally, we'd have a factory that you could just go into, pick your widget, and that's coming. There's a lot of opinionated providers for the security side. But compliance really oftentimes is focused on a specific requirement, right? So thinking about the broad side of compliance, PCI, HIPAA, etc. HIPAA's focused on who looked at this record, were they authorized to look at it, and that chain of custody going forward. That's a very small case. And there's all these other things that you could be doing to ensure you're secure. This is just one part of an overall information security management strategy.
Without having to break down all of like SOC 2, that's a framework. How did we get to a point where we have SOC 2 compliance, but at the same time, you're saying that that's not security?
Right. So with SOC 2 compliance, there are general standards, good guidelines, right? Well, rules, if you want to have that attestation. But they don't consider your environment, right? There's standards that you have to rise to, but your environment could be running on pigeons, right? SOC 2 doesn't consider the fact that your environment runs on carrier pigeon. And so to secure that presents new challenges, really getting into understanding your business and then applying best practices to it. That would be that side to fill in those gaps that SOC 2 doesn't provide. We see a lot with automated compliance solutions right now. And if you did everything in that automated compliance solution, you would be more secure than you are today. Guaranteed. But if you go and run a scan of your infrastructure with various tools, you're going to find three things that SOC 2 never, ever considered. And even worse, if you're using these compliance solutions, they might not understand your cloud provider. They might be AWS focused and Azure was an afterthought. And that represents even more challenges in trying to get secure when the suggestions don't align with how you actually operate.
That's very true, but I would like to try to dive deeper into that. My understanding, and I may be mistaken, my understanding of SOC 2 is that you can define the controls, the specific tests you want to comply with the SOC 2 controls, which are indeed standard. Of course, with standardized, with compliance automation tools, these tests have also been made standardized. So, like, in your opinion, can we imagine a SOC 2 situation where I have my own tests for my own carrier pigeon based system and my auditor would be happy? Would that work?
Yeah, so with SOC 2, everything comes down to your policies and whether
Yes.
or not you adhere to those policies. Absolutely. And those policies can make you secure or less secure. One strategy that's really worked well for me is ensuring that our policies are broad, right, but not specific. So, in other words, we set a minimum threshold for like TLS, right? We only want TLS 1.2. You want to use 1.1, that's fine. We're going to reject you. However, we will accept TLS 1.3. I don't need to put TLS 1.3 in my policy, and the auditors are going to be happy if we are only doing TLS 1.3. One of the other things that happens with SOC 2 is you've got to set up various ceremonies, right, and do specific actions at specific times, such as third-party vendor reviews, right, for vulnerability and risk compliance. Those happen minimum of annually because the audit window usually is annual, right? So it's got to happen once in the reporting or observation period. Doesn't mean that you have to do it annually, right? You can break that up. You can do it quarterly. You can meet your policies or exceed them. And that can be an art sometimes in drafting those policies and ensuring that you're not only meeting them, but also delivering on those promises. And so when the audit occurs in SOC 2, the auditors are going to look at your policies and they're going to say, okay, show me a ticket for this quarter where you actually did your patching. And we'll provide that summary report. And one thing that always has gotten in the weeds for me with SOC 2 is the quality of documentation that you provide really determines your outcome when it comes to audit. The auditors want to see it with their own eyes. Take screenshots because it eliminates all doubt. And that documentation side is definitely an art because you can't go back to January during December and fix stuff. And so another thing with that is having the policies up next to you, whether you're running an incident or whether you're doing a change management ticket. Just have that policy up and walk through it is really helpful. But to answer your question, yes, at the end of the day, it's are you adhering to your own policies? And if so, great. If not, that's a finding. And you might end up with a qualified opinion. There's two types of opinions, qualified and unqualified. And what you're generally shooting for is unqualified opinion, which means that unequivocally, you're good. And the auditors give you a thumbs up.
With SOC 2, it forces you to adhere to your own policies, right?
Right.
So that means you can set very stringent policies or very lax ones. Does that mean, in your opinion, that SOC 2 is good and adaptable, or does it mean that it's weak compared to ISO 27001?
I'd say it really rests on the quality of the auditor, right? If you set up lax policies and the auditor's job is to issue an opinion whether or not you can be trusted with client data, and they see these policies and they're really lax, and the evidence you provide demonstrates that laxness, it would leave a bad taste in the auditor's mouth that could impact your attestation, right?
I want to move to a slightly broader topic then, because something we've talked about on the program a number of times is this idea of risk. Like, it's really hard to communicate technical vulnerabilities and exploits and technical debt, but risk is something that, like, the executive team kind of comprehends. So how are we defining risk here? Like, what is if we say we're compliant and the exec team thinks, okay, we're great, how do we talk about risk in those terms?
Right. So risk is a tool for me. especially working in very constrained budgets. I love startups. And the issue with startups is, you can get this product that'll make you more secure, but you can't afford it because so often security is a feature, right? When it's actually a requirement. And so for me, thinking about risk, there's different ways of qualifying risk. There's likelihood and there's impact, right? But risk overall is malleable. Just because something has a high likelihood of impact and a critical exposure doesn't necessarily mean that it has to stay there. Maybe you can't get this $4,000 a year tool to scan all your source code, but you can add this free tool on top and maybe drop that down to more of a medium risk, right? And so I look at risk as kind of this tool that I can use to equate to dollars and other things that enable me to improve our security posture while still having a little bit of a buffer there improve our security posture within the constraints that I have.
I do want to shift gears a little bit. I think in the same realm of understanding risk and like the bigger picture inside of the organization, not just checking boxes with compliance, but you use a term back in, you're talking Birmingham, that's where we met, DevOps Days Birmingham, lifeguards, not police. And I really liked that concept, but can you explain what you mean by all that?
Yeah, totally. So lifeguards, not police is something that I picked up from somebody else, Marcel DeVries, who's the CTO of Zebia, big Microsoft consultancy in Europe. And he did this presentation on the future of IT. And the future of IT, we need to be considering our security posture a lot, right? But how do you do that? And the problem that we run into so often in security is that we say we can't do things, right? We put up these walls, these barriers. We tell people to move along or do this, do that, line up, single file, right? That's more of a police officer type talk where you're restricting access and controlling a scene. That's not what we need to do to have the best security possible. To have the best security possible, we have to build culture. And you don't get that by putting up walls and barriers to innovation, right? So often when a developer is working in a compliance organization, I've been that guy where you just want to make one commit and it's boom. Oh, there's these 10 other things I didn't know about. Security comes walking in and says, what are you thinking? Nobody needs that. So instead, take the lifeguard route where we jump in and swim with you, we coach you, and we improve your skills, right? A lifeguard's going to be there to jump in and help you out, but they can pull you out of the water if they have to. And really, I think a lot of it comes down to the education side. A lot of lifeguards are in the education business. They're making swim tests, they're coaching, etc. By giving the direct feedback to the developers instantly when they commit their code and a branch builds, along with the context of why, down to the detail, it's going to result in a more focused and broader adoption to where things don't get out of hand, right? You're not running around checking each developer's code. Instead, you're allowing the developer room to grow, understand and learn, and become better, right? So we'll give you a kiddie pool. And once you're out of the kiddie pool, we'll give you a big pool. And that allows us room to fail, right? By having the kiddie pool and the big pool. Big pool's production, kiddie pool is dev. Hey, I deployed this resource. Is it secure? Because we got to break things and we got to move fast in a startup. Having that walled garden, that kiddie pool, enables that patience and space to fail without risk to the organization, right? So that's where I get lifeguards, not police.
So if I try to like rephrase this a bit to see if I understood well, you're basically advocating for security and engineering working hand in hand to develop new products in a secure way so that, we can design new solutions, innovate security and engineering in a way that provides value to the end user. Is that really, have I answered correctly, or am I missing the point here?
That's well put. Yes, working together with a shared goal to deliver value to our clients. Absolutely.
So in that particular context, I think you're making a quite strong hypothesis, which is you have that security persona who understands and is willing to help. It's not always the case in all organizations, and worse, even if there is that security persona, they might be overwhelmed with the number of projects going on. So how would you deal with that? What advice do you have for organizations where the security persona is overwhelmed with requests? What can we do?
Automate, automate, automate. Every time. Whether that's doing your access reviews or in your source control during your branch builds and your pipeline, giving that feedback, just automate, automate, automate. I'm only one person. I don't have enough hours in the day to chase every commit, right? But what I can do is set up some guardrails within our build system to give that feedback. And me being a data guy from the start really helps with that, because if you're tracking all your data and collecting it appropriately, access reviews shouldn't take time. They should be reviews, not investigations, right? So automate, automate, automate.
I really like also the tonal shift of this lifeguard versus police. You phrased it, I thought, very eloquently. It's like, we can't just keep showing up and say, you did it wrong, you idiot. But that goes hand in hand with the other part that you talked about, education patients, and specifically allowing space to fail. Like, we all want people to do things the right way, and like coaxing them to, hey, there is a better way. There's a way that the auditors are going to look for. I just really liked that approach.
I'll be frank here. When I started out in this, I was a police officer because we were down to the wire at the company I was working at to get this thing rolled out so that we could land a client. And the biggest thing I learned there was that no one is ever going to remember your policies, not even you. So police just doesn't work, right? Because you're never going to know every single law off the top of your head. And instead, what works a lot better is establishing lower environments, right? You should have dev, test, prod. Scoping those environments so that you can guarantee that there's no client data in there, right? And also enabling people to make changes to those environments. And if they make that change, get feedback as soon as possible. So what I've ended up doing is I've taken Steam Pipe and we just spin up a container every single day. And it runs against the environments. And it has all the configurations that we need to see there. Because the developers have a lot more they're focused on that provides a lot more value than making sure that port 443 is the only one. Looking long term, I want to create tons of opinionated modules and IAC and stuff like that so that the developers can just pick from that factory which widget they want. But we got to move fast and we got to break things in the startup world. And so for me, scoping and ensuring those lower environments are playgrounds for the developers to do their best work is really my goal.
Right. So it sounds to me like you're quite the advocate for the DevOps for compliance, if that makes sense. So do you have any tips or tricks as to how we can integrate security into the DevOps process? Can we do something with our pipelines? Can we change our agile methodology to fit that? What can we do?
Yeah, one thing that I really enjoy, so I work in a very, very agile, like dogmatically agile. We don't do Scrum Fall, which is waterfall with ceremonies. We're full agile. And one of the things that's really worked great is to treat security like bugs. Okay. And the way you do that is in your automated pipeline. You run your code security scans, whether that's SonarQube, even your NPM audits, right? Easy CLI integration. Why aren't you doing it already, right? Even if it's report only. And then when that build occurs, they're going to get instant feedback. Now, when that feedback comes along, it may be something that needs to be prioritized immediately or not. So if you think back to Agile, bugs are really unfinished work. They weren't defined well. Maybe the story wasn't defined. It wasn't well thought through. A vulnerability wasn't considered at the time. If you're in the sprint, right, and it's critical, you might remediate it during the sprint. Otherwise, it goes into the backlog. But when the next sprint starts and you've got that bug in there, it goes to the top of the sprint because it's a bug. It's unfinished work. It needs to get fixed. And the overall goal of that is to viciously attack technical debt, which is what we're really talking about anyways. And so by prioritizing that and reserving space in your sprint to ensure that those bugs are worked as quickly as possible, really does the trick to help the pipeline flow and remediate those and keep things running. A CVSS and a vulnerability that's been reported has probably been insecure for 6 months, but it's also not going to stop you from like a HTTP injection attack in one of your packages where it's remotely calling something. But we can still do those basic checks, even if we can't afford a service like Sneak or something like that. I'm a big fan of SonarQube, especially, again, because I viciously attack tech debt. SonarQube is going to give them immediate feedback inside of the PR, right, for any OWASP top 10 issue. Right there in the PR. And you can set that quality gate up so that you got to fix this before you can merge, right? And by doing that, it's small changes over time. This idea of Kaizen, that small changes over time result in something tremendous. And keeping that loop super small with that feedback, frequent, lots of feedback, seems to work a lot better than, hey, here's all your problems that I found in the past month, go fix them, right? So keeping as close to the developers as possible is always the ideal scenario.
There's a lot of stuff we've covered today, but it sounds like give people the right tools, teach them how to use them, and be there for when they need the help is gonna get us down that path for security. It's kind of my summation of what we've been talking about. We do need to be compliant because, well, compliance isn't optional. Security isn't optional, compliance isn't optional, but they're not the same thing. And it's an important lesson to remember. So we're wrapping things up here. But before we do, if people wanted to find out more about you or where you're speaking or anything you're writing out there, where could they get a hold of you? What's the best place to
Easiest way to get a hold of me is to hop on over to davidhawthorne.com. It's Hawthorne with an E, like the author. That's going to take you straight to my LinkedIn profile, and you can reach out there. I'm also at Shell Ninja on most platforms, but I usually don't hop on most platforms, so I may miss your message if you try to get a hold of me that way.
That's on GitHub then, so we could... All right, we can go look at your repos. Maybe find some code that'd be useful to us. Well, it is now time for, I think, everybody's favorite part of the show. I know it's mine.
The goal here is to know you as a security professional, right? To identify David. Who really are you, David? Let's start with the first question. What's your favorite command line tool focused on security?
Well, I started out doing data stuff, so I'm going to name off a data tool, SteamPipe. And what SteamPipe enables you to do is basically create a Postgres database that you can query, whether it's through the CLI or through your preferred interface, of all of your cloud configuration. And it's not just cloud configuration. You can query Jira. They have connectors for everything. And so for me, trying to get a bunch of things in line at once, starting out down this security journey, SteamPipe was completely invaluable. So much so that I use it almost daily to this day, even for non-security things.
Right. So the second question is, as a hiring manager looking for security professionals, what's your go-to question?
That's a good question. My go-to question for hiring security positions is, let's say the CISO is a bad actor. What are you going to do about it? How are you going to go about reporting the CISO, who you report to, as a bad actor? And just see where they take it. Do they go to the CISO directly and say, hey, saw you running these really odd queries for a specific person. What's going on there? Or do they hit the nuclear button and escalate all the way to the board immediately? And it can really tell you a lot about the overall shape of the candidate as a person, how they respond to that. It's a soft question, but I find that it reveals so much about who people are and how they think. And it also provides a good avenue to present different challenges in that chain that they go up as the scenario evolves.
That's quite interesting. I may steal that if you don't mind.
Absolutely. Please do. That's why we do this.
Sounds good. Thanks. Third question. What's the best security advice you can give?
Know your audience. When you're talking about security things, adjust how you communicate towards your audience. When I'm talking to the risk committee made up of a bunch of senior leadership, C-level folk, I'm going to talk in dollars and cents. This is what this could cost us. This is how much this will cost us, and this is how much it can save us, right? Whereas when I'm talking with developers or engineers, I might say, hey, actually, I know this is a low-risk bug, but here's the number of times this specific endpoint's been hit with this vulnerability. We need to take care of this. And by backing everything up with data, whether that's dollars and cents or aggregate numbers, it really grounds the conversation in reality, right? And not opinions. And then you can have an open discussion about where to go next.
That makes a lot of sense. So I guess we're going to switch perspectives for a bit. What's the worst security advice you've ever received?
As I said, I recently hired a SOC analyst, our first SOC analyst. And they came to me and said in class, they were always told I'm going to be the bad guy. And I backed up for a second and I said, well, maybe they were talking about maintaining a lack of conflict with your coworkers. That way you're not compromised if an incident occurs. No. We're always the bad guys because we have to be, it doesn't have to be this way. And what's even worse is a graduate confirmed this for me. Graduate from another school, another place, had the same exact instruction from their instructor. My view is if we start out as being the bad guy, the only thing that will happen is we remain bad guys. But if we provide so much value to the business that people don't really know about, we're the ones out there answering the security questionnaires so that we can generate more revenue by landing a client. We're protecting the organization's reputation by not having outages and downtime and considering our availability. We're protecting our customer data, and we're helping and providing value. A lot of the times that goes hidden. So always be aware and really evangelize the role as a good guy. Don't consider yourself always the bad guy, or you will be the bad guy.
That is some really good advice. the Department of No gets said in a lot of these recordings and just a lot of conversations I have out there. And I really like that lifeguard analogy. Like, you got to teach people to swim. That's the only way it's going to scale. If everybody is not on the security team, but is so security minded that, of course, we wouldn't do it in an insecure way. Of course, we're going to do it in the way that the policy set out, because it makes a total amount of sense. And then we get to ship things faster. And that's kind of the whole point of DevOps, is let's get more stuff out the door faster, because then we get more clients, then we get happier clients. And then, as Goldratt said in the goal, then we make the money. That's kind of the goal. But hey, thanks very much for coming on and being part of the Security Repo Podcast. It's been a great conversation. I know I learned a little bit here. Hey, Kazar, any last final words from you?
From my perspective, I think I'm going to keep that question in mind for my next interviews that I will be doing hopefully soon. And I'll also look into that steam pipe stuff. That sounds quite promising.